Hi, I'm Mimi Geerges. Journalist Souad Mekhennet was born and raised in Germany, the daughter of Muslim immigrants. Since 9/11, she's reported on some of the most dangerous and important stories of our time. How were you sure that you wouldn't get kidnapped?
I asked, are you guaranteeing that I will get out of this alive? And they said, yes, well, if everything goes well.
Welcome to the Mimi Geerges Show. When it comes to Islamic radicalism, Washington Post reporter Souad Mekhennet has seen it all. She first started with investigating the German connection of the 9/11 hijackers. She went to Iraq when war broke out there, then to every hotspot in the Middle East. With her Arabic language skills and knowledge of the culture, she's able to reach high-level jihadists as well as the Muslim communities of Europe. She's written a memoir called I Was Told to Come Alone. Souad, welcome.
Thanks for having me, Mimi.
So in 2014, you're able to arrange a meeting with a high-level ISIS leader. You were told to come alone, which is where we get the title of your memoir, to leave behind any phones, your ID even, just to bring a pen and a pad. Isn't that extremely dangerous?
Yes, of course it is extremely dangerous, and there was a decision-making process where I really had to think about, should I do it or not? It was so when I reached out to contact people within ISIS, and I said I wanted to speak to somebody who had authority, right? Who not just some foot soldier, but somebody who really knew about the structure of the group and what the caliphate was about, and
a decision maker.
A decision maker, yeah, somebody with with power. They didn't tell me who I would meet. I had no idea when I went to the meeting, when I finally decided to do it, that this person actually came also, had a similar background. And it was somebody who grew up in Europe and who spoke several languages fluent. And I was a bit shocked because I realized, and in the book, and I was told to come alone, I described the conversations we had, also the moments where I challenged him quite a lot, and up until the moment where I felt he grew upset and his hand moved towards the pocket where I could see he had a gun or a knife, and I decided to stop then. But it was shocking to me to see that somebody who grew up in Europe, who could have turned into something totally different, joined this ideology, and he was very clear about what the objectives were.
How were you sure that you wouldn't get kidnapped? Because journalists, I don't have to remind you, have been kidnapped before you and killed.
Of course, and there's never a guarantee, Mimi. There was no guarantee that, except for their agreement to grant me the interview, and I asked, are you guaranteeing that I will get out of this alive? And they said, yes, well, if everything goes well. But everything
if we
goes
like your
well,
questions.
everything goes well can be very interpreted in a different way. If your questions are going well and you don't ask too many difficult questions or challenging questions, then yes. But it's really, after having done this for so many years, I also felt at a certain moment when I sat with him in the car and when I challenged him that now you have to stop. It was the right decision, yeah.
Your mom is Turkish, your dad is Moroccan. Did you ever experience discrimination in Germany because you're not a white German?
Yeah, it was something I experienced, first of all, as a child, when I lived in Morocco for 3.5 years with my grandmother, who was the first feminist I met in my life. And when my parents took me back to Germany, some kids in the neighborhood were not allowed to play with us. We were the only non-German Germans in that neighborhood. We were a little bit the outsiders due to the fact that our parents were just workers and not managers or bankers. That was number one. Number two, I think the fact that my oldest sister is mentally challenged also played a role in this, because some kids would say, oh, we cannot play with you, you have weird sisters. And then when I grew a bit older, as a teenager, I felt really I was worried, not only worried, I was afraid of what happened in Germany. I saw the houses of Turkish guest workers burning, and I myself and my brother, we witnessed how skinheads were chasing us.
These are the neo-Nazis.
The neo-Nazis, and they were basically telling us, look, gypsies, they called us gypsies, we will kill you, we will burn you. And those were moments where I told my parents, pack your stuff because they don't want us here. And this came also because I read so much about German history, about what happened during the Holocaust, and I really feared for my life. Now, discrimination happened also after I became a journalist. I had the best degrees at the university. I went to the best journalism schools, speak many languages, and yet it was very difficult for me to make a career in Germany. I wish I could have had the chance, but never mind, I ended up with some of the best newspapers in the world, the Washington Post and the New York Times before that. So yeah, I'm grateful.
You were still in college when 9/11 happened, and there emerged a German connection to the hijackers. So you went to Hamburg to talk to people there. What did you find out?
Well, it was very shocking to me as well, because I figured out that I lived in Hamburg. I went to journalism school there around the same time that 3 of the 4 9/11 pilots used to live there. So I didn't understand what happened. Why would those men commit mass murder in the name of my religion? I went into the neighborhoods where they lived. Those were neighborhoods I never been to when I lived in Hamburg, and found out that there was a totally different interpretation of Islam. You know, people were talking about an Islam that I had never known before. You know, I went to Quran school in Morocco. I have Muslim parents, but we never were taught like this. And to me, this was a journey into a world I hadn't known. So I went to one of my first interviews, for example, in a suit, right? Because I thought I wanted to be
professional.
Professional, show them that I, have respect and so on. And then the people looked at me and said, "Where's your hijab? How come you're wearing a shirt that is not long enough, that is not covering everything?" And so it was a learning process for me as well.
So the people that you talked to never condemned the 9/11 attacks?
They did not, yeah.
Someone that you spoke to said that the hijackers, quote, paid America back for what they and the Jews have done to us all these years.
Yeah.
Where does that come from?
Well, this comes from their own interpretation of how the world looks like. They were absolutely, they believed that there was some conspiracy going on from the United States and, as they called it, the Jews, in order to not really, what they said, liberate Palestine. They believed that the Jews were running the media. It's this whole propaganda that I had known from learning or reading about the Nazis. And I challenged some of those people, and I would tell them, but you are of Moroccan descent or of Algerian descent or of Tunisian descent. What does this have to do with your country? And they would say, well, we don't think as Moroccans, Algerians, or Tunisians, we think as Muslims. And to me, this was a totally new interpretation of Islam. And I wanted to know, why is it possible that in Germany or in Europe, we have people who are full of so much hatred? And I began to understand that a big problem were some of the so-called mosques, right? You had one of the mosques some of the 9/11 hijackers went to was in a red light district, right next to you had apparently the mosque next to the prostitutes who were standing there in line. So you had people passing by this red light district facilities, always saying, this is how the West is, right? They were teaching their kids. I would talk to kids who would say, yeah, look, the West is, it's just about how they treat women, how they look at women, and it's full of this, of all the things that are haram, that are actually sins. And so nobody really cared about who were the people preaching in the mosques. And when I began to look into the books, the kind of teachings, the material, the imams or the so-called imams, and I would ask them, where did you actually study Islam? And you would figure out that's not somebody who studied at...
But didn't German intelligence know that this was going on? Didn't they care to look and see what of these imams teaching in their mosques?
Well, look, I mean, in all fairness, we had somebody called, we had imams also in the United States who were preaching things at mosques that people didn't really follow until much later. We had a recent case. Apparently, one of the London attackers was inspired by an imam who was putting his speeches out there on the internet.
This is
right in
Awlaki.
Michigan. No, Awlaki was killed in a drone strike. No, this is the Imam Jibril, I think is his name, who's in Michigan. But Awlaki was a U.S. citizen, for
Yes.
example. No, the interesting thing about this particular mosque, and until this today, I don't really understand how it was possible that all this happened. Opposite from the mosque facility, you have a large police station. So I went there and I'm like, why did nobody really understand what was happening here? And even the people, the friends of the 9/11 hijackers, they told me, look, Mohammed Atta and all those people, they walked around in Islamic clothes. They weren't hiding. So whatever happened, I mean,
it's the concept that the West has of, you know, that's religion and we don't really care about religion, we only care about politics. But sometimes, in this case, the two come together.
They came together, certainly in the mosque, yeah, in this mosque.
Souad, how did going to Iraq to report on the American-led invasion, how did that change you?
It definitely shaped me in a way that I look from different perspectives at what we see sometimes. And I will get to this in a second. I think I had a different view on what happened during the so-called Arab Spring because of what I witnessed during my time in Iraq. So here I was in the country where we were told that Saddam Hussein was, toppled also because the weapons of mass destructions. But aside from the weapons of mass destructions, we all knew that he was an awful person and so on. What I did not really understand back then was why the whole concept of the de-Baathification has happened. And now, of course, I do understand why it happened, but back then, this decision, I would see that some decisions were taken by the US administration, and I was wondering, who, for God's sake, is advising you guys? I mean, there was a difference between what I saw happening on the ground and what was announced or communicated to the population, and even to their own soldiers. I met American soldiers who told me, look, we came here because people said to us back in Washington, those Iraqis, they will welcome you with tea and flowers and you will be seen as liberators. And out of a sudden,
They
we
told
found
the American
ourselves,
public that too.
well, and out of a sudden, those young soldiers, 18, 19-year-old kids, really found themselves in situations where people said, we hate you. Why did you come? Because, we made the mistake, not we, but decision makers, to listen just to a particular circle of people. Very often it's people who, in this case it was Ahmed Chalabi, people who studied in the US, who knew exactly how to play the game, who knew who to call in Washington, who were there to have dinners and teas, and would give them this idea of, you do this step and then this is turning into, that. But they were not really checking about what are the motives of those guys to do all this. So it was the idea of Chalabi to have the de-Baathification. And at the same time, we saw a lot of Shia militias becoming stronger within the structure and taking over the security system in Iraq. We also saw some people getting into high-level positions who were absolutely influenced by the Iranian regime. Yep. Now, this all unfortunately led to a very toxic mixture, given that they also dissolved the army and the police. And we had a whole bunch of people who knew how to deal with weapons, with arms, who were unemployed, security background, unemployed, unhappy, angry, and who saw that militias took over the security of their country. To be surprised that that Al-Qaeda and Abu Musab al-Zarqawi's group then gained a lot of power. I mean, I'm surprised that people were surprised.
Yeah.
Because to a certain extent, maybe this has shaped me so that when I covered the so-called Arab Spring, I asked some of those activists questions some of my colleagues wouldn't ask them. For example, if somebody would come to me and say, we want democracy. Happened to me in Egypt, Tunisia, Bahrain. And specifically in Bahrain, I was very interested there because, I come from a Sunni Shia background. And I was really thinking, well, what is this about? And when I spoke to some activists there, and I would ask them, what do you want? And they would say, we want democracy. And I say, okay, explain to me, what does democracy mean?
Right.
Does it mean that your wives, who at the moment are not allowed to get a divorce because you, Ayatollah, said they should not be allowed to get a divorce, will they be able to get a divorce? And then they would say, no, 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 no. I mean, this is our Ayatollah has to decide how the structure will look like. And
it's a very different idea of democracy than what we have.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think we have to be more careful when we do this kind of reporting to ask these questions.
In your conversations with jihadists, they told you, this is before the rise of ISIS, they told you that the only solution was a caliphate, an Islamic state. How is it that that idea has been around for quite some time? This is not new with ISIS.
No, it's not new with ISIS. It's been, in some of my opening chapters I mentioned, for example, I mentioned two events in 1979 that I believe played a very big role in the rise of radicalization among Sunnis and Shia again. One was the return of Ayatollah Khomeini to Iran, and the second one was the siege of Mecca. And the siege of Mecca is a very interesting incident. A lot of people don't have this on their radar, but you have this group of people, very radical people, who had the idea that one of them was the Mahdi and that they would declare also some kind of Islamic state. They went into Mecca, the holiest sites of Islam, and the Saudi royal family allowed their own clerics to basically blackmail them to a certain point, because they wanted to send special forces, troops into Mecca to take those people out. For this, they needed the approval from the clerics, the ulema, and the ulema basically dictated, okay, but we want you to take this rights away and change this and that, and we want more power. And this is the dilemma, I mean, one of the reasons why we are dealing with such a big dilemma today. So the idea is old. And the interesting thing is they all talk about the kind of caliphate or Islamic state, the way the Prophet, during the times of the Prophet. And I sit there and I really have to pause sometimes, because both my parents happen to be descendants of the Prophet. And I then ask them, how do you know what the Prophet would want you to do now? And how do you know this is really what the Prophet wanted to be and wants the caliphate to look like? Some people don't like these kind of questions. And
yeah, I can imagine.
I understand it's
So in your reporting, when were you most afraid?
There were a couple of moments where I was afraid. There were
where you thought you were going to die?
Yes, yes. There were. One was in Egypt when I had the guns of people from the intelligence service on my head, and I really thought that's it. The second one, well, before that, in Iraq, they blew up a hotel close next to the one I was in. I didn't know what would happen to us then.
Why is Egyptian intelligence pointing a gun at your head?
And my colleague Nick Kulish and I, we happened to be there during a couple of days before the so-called Arab Spring broke out there, because we were working on a book about a Nazi doctor. We had uncovered that one most wanted Nazi doctor had lived in Egypt and for many years, and they couldn't, or they didn't know, because he changed his identity as well. But
you somehow got arrested
as on our way from Alexandria to Cairo. We were arrested, and then they thought that we might have been spies or whatsoever, and we spent a very unpleasant night at the facility of the intelligence service.
Have there ever been threats against your life?
Absolutely, yeah, there have been. There have been threats by all sides. I have witnessed situations where I had German security coming to the house saying there's a threat against your life. People want to kidnap you. And the day before I was supposed to have the meeting with the German intelligence service, Bahraini activists attacked me because they didn't like the line of questions I asked. And this is...
So you have enemies everywhere.
Well, I mean, I guess
but you have friends.
I have also friends too, but
yeah.
But this is the price you pay sometimes when you don't take sides as a reporter, Mimi. And that's and when you ask and challenge all the sides, because this is my job. It's not my job to, I'm not affiliated with an organization that does activism. Our aim is to give the reader the best possible insights about what is happening in the countries or within those groups, and my job is to ask, no matter who, critical questions.
I want to ask you about the ISIS terrorist nicknamed Jihadi John.
Yeah.
He was the masked executioner of American journalists with the British accent. Everybody wanted to know his identity. You were the one that found out and published his real name. How did you do that?
Well, those were a mixture of different circumstances. I worked with a colleague from the Post together on this, and Adam Goldman. So it was, what I did was I took some of my old interviews, like the one I had with Abu Yusuf, the ISIS leader from 2014, and went through the notebook, and I realized there were a couple of things he told me about highly educated people in their group who also came from the UK and who were of different backgrounds. So I started to make a list. And we knew from some of the former hostages that Jihadi John was very interested in Somalia as well, in video. So I made really literally a list of different words like Somalia, UK, and all highly educated. And I had one very high up source within ISIS, not the commander I interviewed, somebody else who I've known for many years, who was first with Al-Qaeda and then joined ISIS. And through different ways, I got a phone. They decide which phone. They arranged that, a phone and a SIM card that was only for this one phone call. And I basically spoke to him and just told him, look, I'm trying to do a story about this guy. And I put together some of the code words that I had. And what happened then was that he was under the impression that the British,
already knew.
That I already knew, and that somebody was leaking information to us to frame a certain picture about who this Jihadi John was. And he then leaked the last name to me, his Mohammed Emwazi's family name, and without knowing that I actually didn't know anything about him.
Your name went on that story,
Yes.
obviously, of unmasking Mohammed Emwazi. And you wrote this in the book, quote, "I wanted to send a message to Jihadi John and others like him. We will tell the world who you are and stop you from spreading fear. And a Muslim journalist, a woman, has the power to do this."
Yeah. Yes. Absolutely. This man has killed colleagues of mine. He killed somebody else's child. And this is, he was hiding behind this mask, and it was clear that the moment he would be uncovered, you would take away this elusive figure who became this figure that spread a lot of fear and hatred. And there was also a message to the West, by the way, that it was a Muslim woman who did that. And to especially those who always try to paint the picture as a black and white picture, that this is a fight between Islam and the rest of the world. It's not. It's not. And people have to stop looking for two easy answers here, because those easy answers, or the description of how this conflict apparently is, they are only helping those who are spreading hatred.
Souad, you've been reporting about this since 9/11 for a long time. It just seems like things are getting worse. Muslims are getting angrier. The West is getting attacked. More people are dying. Is there any hope?
As long as there are people like you, like me, like others, there's always hope. But as long as there are people who are willing to listen and who are willing to not follow the easy answers, and those who are trying to divide us, there is hope. But we have to be aware that it will be very difficult indeed. And this is not going to stop with maybe ISIS losing ground in Syria or in Iraq. No, it's not going to be the end of ISIS, and we have yet still to see what is going to happen with Al-Qaeda. But we also have to very honestly look at what is happening within our own societies, and why would somebody who grew up in the US or who was born in the US or in Europe, why would he or she be willing to attack the society they grew up in? And by the way, as long as somebody believes that he or she can be a full member of a society, I think they will do whatever they can to protect this. And many people have done this.
And stop the victimization complex.
Stop the victimization complex.
Everybody's against us, everybody's a racist, everybody...
Yeah, but we also have to be, but also decision makers, leaders, politicians have to be aware that words matter. And depending on how you describe the situation, if people generalize about a group, then that's only playing into the hands of recruiters. And Mimi, if I may add this, it was very important, not only my role as a Muslim woman in this, but there is a woman, I call her Sonia, and we called her Sonia in our story. She was the person who basically helped preventing another attack in France from happening. She is a Muslim French woman and told the French authorities that Abdel Hamid Abaoud was hiding in Paris. Without this woman, there would have been another attack.
Yes.
This woman lives in hiding today. So there are those people, and we have to tell their stories because it's not black and white.
Souad, thank you very much for being on the program, and I hope you stay safe.
Thanks for having me, Mimi.
This has been the Mimi Geerges Show. You can see all of our programs on WHUT.org and YouTube. Connect with us on Facebook and Twitter and leave me your comments there. I look forward to hearing your thoughts. Thanks for watching, and I hope you'll join me again next time.
This program was produced by WHUT, Howard University Television, and made possible by contributions from viewers like you. Thank you.